because she's a black woman, or at least I thought she was. She clearly has black children. So are you saying you don't mind your children growing up in a society where they cannot be taught black?
And Nicki makes a lot of cash. Not as much as Michael Dell.
Nicki Minaj has many, many issues that would lead one to believe that those issues are possibly the reason that she's cozying up to MAGA.
Nicki don't need to worry about Don. She need to be with damn Don Lennon. Nicki Minaj needs to be worried about Chris Hansen. She needs to be worried about.
Y'all, something just snapped in hip-hop culture and no one was ready for it. This isn't about a tweet. This isn't about a headline. This isn't even about politics anymore. This is about betrayal. Because when a woman who built her empire on black culture, when a voice that once screamed against oppression suddenly starts clapping for the very system she condemned, people don't just get confused, they feel used. And tonight, that silence finally broke. Under the spotlight, with a mic in his hand and nothing to lose, Katt Williams didn't hesitate. No warm-up. No jokes. No safety net. He went straight for the jugular. He asked the question no one wanted to ask out loud. How does a black immigrant woman with black children stand next to a movement accused of erasing black history, silencing black pain, and calling black suffering an overreaction? This wasn't framed as a debate. It was framed as a reckoning. Because the internet remembers. It remembers when she called Trump evil. It remembers when she cried over immigrant families being torn apart. It remembers when she said she would never ride that bandwagon. And yet, here we are. What changed? Was it belief? Or was it benefit? As Katt peeled back layer after layer, the crowd didn't laugh, they gasped. Because this wasn't satire. This was an autopsy. Every name that followed made the room colder. Every clip replayed made the silence louder. And with every contradiction exposed, one truth started to feel unavoidable. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't growth. This was calculation. And by the time the mic came close to his mouth for the final line, the question wasn't whether Nicki Minaj had switched sides. The question was, did she sell out? Or was this always the plan?
This video reflects public commentary and reactions to recent statements discussed by Katt Williams about Nicki Minaj. Views shared are opinions for discussion, not statements of fact.
Hey guys, I'm with my favorite president, the best president of all time.
The moment Katt Williams stepped onto that stage, something felt different. This wasn't a comedy set. This wasn't satire. This wasn't even entertainment. It was a confrontation. With the microphone barely inches from his mouth, Katt didn't pace. He didn't smile. He didn't ease the crowd in. He locked eyes with the audience and went straight for the fracture line, the moment the culture cracked. He called it out plainly. This wasn't a political opinion. This was a cultural betrayal. Katt reminded the room who Nicki Minaj used to be. Not the brand. Not the icon. The voice. The woman who once positioned herself as a defender of immigrants. The artist who spoke openly about injustice. The public figure who made it clear she would never align herself with Trump or the movement surrounding him. And yet, according to Katt, that promise didn't just fade, it flipped. What disturbed the crowd wasn't just the shift. It was the speed of it. One moment, condemnation. The next, applause. One moment, outrage. The next, alignment. Katt framed it as a question that cut deeper the longer it hung in the air. What changes faster, beliefs or benefits? He leaned into the contradiction. A black immigrant woman. Black children. A career built on black expression. And yet, support for a movement frequently accused of minimizing black history, dismissing racial trauma, and labeling centuries of suffering as exaggeration. Katt didn't accuse. He didn't declare. He layered. He reminded the audience that this movement didn't emerge in a vacuum. That debates around education, history, and identity weren't abstract, they had real consequences. And when Nicki chose a side, whether intentionally or not, she became part of that consequence. Then came the memory test. Katt replayed the receipts out loud. The past interviews. The old statements. The moments when Nicki described Trump as evil. When she spoke emotionally about immigrant families being torn apart. When she promised she would never join that bandwagon. According to Katt, this wasn't growth. It was abandonment. He described it not as an evolution, but as a transaction. A shift that seemed less about ideology and more about insulation. Less about belief and more about positioning. The room didn't erupt. It went quiet. And that silence said more than applause ever could. At that point, Katt pivoted not to escalate, but to validate what many had already been feeling. He made it clear that the disappointment wasn't isolated. That confusion wasn't random. That people across the culture were asking the same questions, quietly and publicly. That's when another voice entered the conversation.
you know, we love her music. I've spoken to her several times. You know, collectively, I feel like we were a little bit disappointed with her, but I feel like she needs to spend a lot of time with Mr. Bruce Springsteen. She needs to go sit on his lap and let him speak some words of wisdom to her heart. Because somebody.
That clip didn't scream. It sighed. And in that sigh was a collective heartbreak. The commentator didn't cancel Nicki, didn't attack her legacy, didn't deny her influence. Instead, they did something far more damaging. They withdrew belief. Disappointment hits harder than outrage, because outrage still cares. Katt seized on that emotion. He told the crowd that disappointment doesn't come from strangers, it comes from people who expected better. From fans who defended her. From communities that amplified her voice long before it became profitable. Then he took it further. He referenced how the backlash intensified when children and politics entered the conversation. How Nicki's comments shifted from personal opinion into cultural messaging. And how that's when public figures like DL Hughley pushed back, not gently, but publicly. Katt didn't repeat DL's jokes. He didn't need to. He summarized the sentiment behind them. If you want to lecture the public about values, you don't get to ignore the controversies in your own backyard. Delivered with dark humor, the crowd reacted exactly as expected, laughter tangled with discomfort. Because humor only lands when it's pointing at something real. That's when Katt changed tone again. He brought up the LGBTQ+ community. Not as an aside. Not as a footnote. As a foundation. He reminded everyone that Nicki's rise didn't happen in isolation. That her concerts, her chart dominance, her cultural reach were powered in part by a fan base that saw her as a symbol of expression and freedom. A fan base that felt represented. And now, according to critics, that same fan base felt targeted. Katt framed it as a painful irony, a career lifted by a community now being dismissed by the very artists they supported. To him, that wasn't politics. That was abandonment. He used the word the crowd reacted to instantly. Sold out. Not whispered. Not implied. Said. The applause came fast, but it wasn't joyful. It was sharp. Almost offensive. Like the crowd was clapping to protect itself from the realization settling in. Katt didn't stay there long. He moved to the moment that pushed the controversy from debate into confrontation, the Don Lemon exchange. He explained how Nicki's attack on a critic didn't just spark a response, it exposed a pattern. A pattern where anyone questioning her shift was immediately labeled an enemy. Where pushback was reframed as persecution. According to Katt, that defensiveness didn't signal confidence. It signaled fragility. And that's when the final voice of part one entered, not with disappointment, but with fury.
Disgusting. Look, this is what I'll say to Nicki Minaj. I normally don't respond to things like this, but, you know, F it. I'm going to do it this time. I think Nicki Minaj has made it very clear how she feels about African Americans in this country. For I don't think she's one of them, obviously. And she should, under Trump's rules, she should be deported because I don't think, reportedly, that she is a legal citizen here. She is undocumented. And so she has shown her disdain for African Americans. So why are you supporting her? Why are you buying her records? She's also supporting, I have lots of gay friends who love Nicki Minaj. Why are you supporting this?
That wasn't analysis. That was an ultimatum. Katt let the words hang before closing part one with his most unsettling observation yet. He told the audience that when relevance starts to slip, power becomes attractive. That when applause fades, alliances harden. And that movements like MAGA don't just attract believers, they attract opportunity seekers. He stepped closer to the mic, lowered his voice, and left the crowd with a question that refused to stay on the stage. Was this really belief? Or was it business? And as the lights dimmed, one thing was clear. This story wasn't ending here. The doubt has already taken root. What started as disappointment in part one now mutates into something heavier, a confrontation with consequences. Because when power shifts, silence becomes complicity. And when public figures pivot, the ripples don't stay contained. Katt Williams sensed it. He let the moment breathe. Then he pressed forward, not louder, but sharper. His voice didn't rise, it narrowed. That's when the tone changed from observation to indictment. He told the crowd that when people talk about freedom of opinion, they often forget something crucial. Influence multiplies impact. A celebrity doesn't just speak, they signal. And when that signal aligns with a movement accused of dismissing black pain and marginalizing queer voices, the fallout is unavoidable. Katt didn't accuse Nicki of intent. He accused her of awareness. He said she knew exactly how her words would land. That her platform made neutrality impossible. That once you step into politics, especially politics tied to identity, you inherit the consequences whether you want them or not. Then he brought up the moment everything escalated. The church scene. The Don Lemon exchange. The backlash that followed. Katt described it as a turning point, not because of what was said, but because of how criticism was handled. Instead of engaging, Nicki attacked. Instead of clarifying, she deflected. And instead of addressing the substance, she targeted the messenger. That's when DL Hughley entered the story, not as a comedian, but as a mirror.
The whole scene that unfolded at this church.
Right.
You saw this, right? Nicki Minaj going after Don Lemon. You see this, like for
Nicki Minaj,
for reporting
it
it.
was so funny to me. People hate. It's so funny how many on the right hate. They hate transgender and gay people more than they do pedophiles. That's amazing to me. Nicki don't need to worry about Don. She need to be with damn Don Lemon, Nicki Minaj.
The reaction was instant. Laughter erupted, then froze. Because DL's words weren't just jokes. They were indictments wrapped in humor. He wasn't debating ideology. He was exposing contradiction, highlighting how outrage was selectively applied, how some people found it easier to attack critics than confront uncomfortable truths within their own circles. Katt didn't repeat the punchline. He explained the punch. He told the audience that when someone preaches values publicly, their private associations inevitably come under scrutiny. That moral authority isn't declared, it's earned. And once questioned, it can't be reclaimed through deflection. He framed DL's comment not as cruelty, but as context. A reminder that outrage doesn't erase reality. And reality, according to Katt, was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The crowd shifted. Not restless, alert. That's when Katt pivoted again. Away from jokes. Away from individual conflicts. Toward the larger machinery behind the shift. Because what if this wasn't random? What if this wasn't impulsive? What if this wasn't even personal? That's when he introduced a theory that turned the room cold. A theory that suggested Nicki Minaj wasn't just choosing MAGA. MAGA was choosing her.
That Donald Trump and the conservative movement in this country selected Nicki Minaj because they needed a replacement for Candace Owens. Remember, Candace Owens has fallen out of favor with the Republican Party and the mainstream conservative white agenda because she's now exposing the Zionist control of the conservative movement and of the United States government. In fact, Art, I would argue that Charlie Kirk was assassinated, I believe, by the Zionist movement. We're going to distance ourselves from Candace, and this is Donald Trump, the Republican Party, and the mainstream white conservative movement. We got to find another black woman. We got to find another black woman who can compete with Candace Owens nationally and internationally to bring attention away from Candace Owens, who is highlighting the Israeli influence on American politics.
The words didn't land, they sank. Katt paused. He let the implication echo before unpacking it. Slowly, carefully, like someone dismantling a device they knew could explode. He explained that movements don't just spread ideas, they recruit symbols. Faces that soften narratives. Voices that legitimize positions that might otherwise be rejected. And when one figure loses credibility, another is elevated. Not as a leader, as a cover. Katt clarified that this wasn't about Nicki being powerless. Quite the opposite. It was about how power recognizes opportunity, how influence becomes currency, and how alignment isn't always ideological, sometimes it's transactional. He described it as political theater with cultural stakes. Nicki didn't need to write policy. She didn't need to lead rallies. All she had to do was stand there visible, vocal, validated. And suddenly, the movement could point and say, see, even she agrees. The audience didn't cheer. They processed. Because the theory didn't accuse Nicki of ignorance. It accused her of usefulness. Katt emphasized that tokenization isn't accidental. It's strategic, especially when race, celebrity, and controversy intersect. And in his view, Nicki checked every box. Global reach, cultural credibility, controversy-resistant fanbase. Perfect. He reminded the room that Candace Owens didn't lose favor because she stopped being conservative. She lost favor because she became uncontrollable. Because she spoke out of turn. Because she disrupted narratives instead of reinforcing them. Nicki, according to this framing, did the opposite. She stayed on script. Then Katt delivered the line that silenced the room. This isn't representation. This is replacement. He said it calmly. And that calm made it devastating. He went on to explain that when movements elevate symbols, they don't care about consistency, they care about compliance. About who can deliver the message without questioning the machine behind it. Katt didn't say Nicki was forced. He said she was selected. And selection comes with benefits. Protection, amplification, forgiveness. But it also comes with a cost. Because once you become the face, you absorb the backlash. And when critics speak, they're no longer debating policy, they're confronting you. That's when Katt circled back to the audience. He asked them to consider the pattern, the speed of the shift, the defensiveness toward critics, the silence toward supporters feeling betrayed, the alignment with narratives previously condemned. He didn't say it was wrong. He said it was revealing. Katt leaned into the mic one last time, lowering his voice like he was letting the audience in on a secret they already felt but hadn't named yet. When belief changes overnight, he said, it's usually not belief. The lights dimmed, and the question left hanging wasn't whether Nicki Minaj believed in MAGA. It was whether MAGA believed in her or just needed her. The question is whether she understood the cost. Because there are moments in culture when debate ends and memory begins. Moments when statements stop being opinions and start becoming historical markers. Katt Williams understood that, and this is where his tone changed for the final time. Not louder, heavier. He told the audience that everything discussed so far, the flip, the backlash, the alliances, the symbolism, all of it led to one moment. One appearance. One statement that many felt crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The Turning Point USA event. Katt described it as the moment where confusion hardened into conviction. Where speculation gave way to clarity. Because it wasn't said in anger. It wasn't said under pressure. It was said calmly on a stage, with applause waiting on the other side. According to critics, this wasn't Nicki reacting. This was Nicki choosing. Katt replayed the argument being circulated, that teaching Black history makes white children uncomfortable. That emphasizing Black pride somehow diminishes others. That telling the truth about America's past creates imbalance. He paused. Then he asked the question that fractured the room. If truth makes someone uncomfortable, who is that truth really protecting? He reminded the crowd that Black history isn't an elective. It isn't propaganda. It isn't revenge. It's context. And context, once removed, doesn't disappear, it distorts. Katt made it clear, people weren't angry because Nicki had an opinion. They were angry because of what that opinion erased. That's when the final voice entered, not with sarcasm, not with humor, but with gravity.
He said something to the effect that it's not just that we tell Black children to feel proud of themselves, but it's like we're doing that, and at the same time, we're telling other children not to feel proud of themselves. And so I guess she was alluding to this false narrative that the conservatives are putting out there, that teaching Black children Black history and teaching white children the true history of America is somehow going to make white children feel bad about themselves. That bothered me because she's a Black woman, or at least I thought she was. She clearly has Black children. So are you saying you don't mind your children growing up in a society where they cannot be taught Black history or the true history of America because some people feel it offends the self-esteem of white children? And this is so hypocritical, Art, because we've been in America 400 years at least under British North American control. And look at how the self-esteem and self-worth and self-value of Black children has been and continues to be compromised for the benefit of the white child. And yet you're telling me that to implement a curriculum of corrective history where you're not insulting white people, you're not denigrating white people, you're simply making sure white children understand that the foundation of this country was laid and built and cemented on the genocide of Native Americans and the enslavement of African people. And not just the enslavement of African people, the dehumanization.
The room didn't react. It absorbed. Because this wasn't a soundbite. This was an indictment of logic itself. Dr. Umar wasn't debating policy, he was questioning identity. Asking whether proximity to power had overridden responsibility to truth. Katt let the words linger. Then he explained why that clip hit so hard. Because it wasn't abstract. Nicki isn't just a public figure. She's a mother. A Black mother. Raising Black children in a world that already struggles to tell them who they are without distortion. And when someone in that position downplays the importance of history, critics argue it sends a message far beyond politics. It tells children what parts of themselves are negotiable. Katt emphasized that no one was asking Nicki to be an activist. No one was demanding perfection. But when influence meets education, silence becomes a stance and statements become legacy. He reminded the audience that America's history isn't neutral.
And now he's telling Kevin Hart to pack his bags and disappear.
And sanitized repeatedly to protect those in power. Teaching the truth isn't about blame, it's about accuracy. And accuracy, according to critics, was exactly what Nicki's remarks threatened. This is where the conversation shifted from outrage to mourning. Katt described it as cultural grief, The moment fans realize someone they defended no longer represents what they believed. When admiration turns into distance. When loyalty becomes conditional. He talked about social media, not as a mob, but as a mirror. How fans weren't just attacking Nicki, they were warning each other. Using her as a case study. A cautionary tale about what happens when relevance declines and power becomes tempting. He framed it carefully. Not everyone who joins MAGA does it out of belief. Some do it because the spotlight is guaranteed. The defense is aggressive. And the loyalty is loud. Katt didn't say Nicki needed saving. He said she had made a decision. And decisions don't need defense, they need accountability. He addressed the idea that Nicki was being misunderstood. That her words were taken out of context. That critics were overreacting. And then he dismantled that argument with one sentence. Context doesn't change impact. He told the audience that when people explain harm away instead of listening to it, they reveal more about their priorities than their intentions. The room stayed silent. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was closure. Katt walked the crowd through the final emotional shift from disbelief to acceptance. That Nicki Minaj, the artist many grew up with, wasn't confused, wasn't lost, wasn't manipulated. She was strategic. He said the line slowly, clearly. She's not confused. She's calculated. And with that, the last illusion collapsed. Katt leaned forward, almost whispering, as if to make sure no one could later say they misheard him. This isn't belief, he said. This is business. The lights dimmed. And the story ended the only way it could, without answers, but with a reckoning. Because the final question wasn't whether Nicki Minaj believes in MAGA. The final question was darker. Was she reading a script, or helping write one? And this is where it stops being entertainment. Because what we just watched wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a bad quote. It wasn't the internet being dramatic. It was a moment that snapped trust in real time, and once that kind of trust breaks, it doesn't quietly come back. For years, people defended her. Excused the contradictions. Explained away the silence. Gave the benefit of the doubt because legacy matters. But tonight made one thing impossible to ignore. This wasn't confusion, it was choice. A choice to stand with power instead of people. A choice to trade history for comfort. A choice to accept applause from spaces that once rejected everything she claimed to represent. And that's why this hurts more than anger ever could. Because betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from voices you trusted. From figures you elevated. From icons you believed would never cross certain lines. When that happens, outrage fades fast, and what replaces it is grief. The internet isn't asking for apologies. It isn't demanding explanations. It's asking a quieter, heavier question. Who is this really for? Because when the dust settles, relevance fades, and the cameras move on, history doesn't forget alignment. It remembers who showed up, where they stood, and what they were willing to sacrifice to stay visible. And maybe that's the tragedy in all of this. Not that someone chose a side, but that they chose it knowing exactly who would be left behind. So now the culture is watching. Not reacting. Not debating. Watching. Watching to see if this was a moment of belief, or a calculated performance wrapped in patriotism and profit. Because once the mask slips, it never fully goes back on. And the silence that follows isn't confusion, it's recognition. Drop your thoughts below. Not the loud ones. The honest ones.